Hey, this is Zulem Urbina, and tune into the relay for the latest news in boxing all around the world. Thank you for supporting myself and other female boxers. We truly appreciate it.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. We're going to kick it off with the Probellum card that took place in Dubai yesterday that featured Regis Prograrius versus Tyrone McKenzie on the undercard. This fight didn't leave much to the imagination, and why would it? We already knew ahead of the fight that Regis Prograrius has competed at a much higher level than Tyrone McKenzie. Regis Prograrius, who exhibited many of the calling cards
Characteristics we've become familiar with.
Regis Prograrius is one of the pound-for-pound biggest punchers at 140 pounds. He's up there with Subriel Matias.
Jose Ramirez and Josh Taylor.
He's a heavy-handed puncher that knows how to set up his shots, knows how to roll and counter.
He's a heavy-handed southpaw.
Scoring a knockdown early in this fight, in the second round of a fight that only went 6.
It only went 6 rounds before it was stopped.
Tyrone McKenzie suffered a rather unsightly cut to his right eye.
Tyrone's very statuesque for 140 pounds. Durable.
Albeit out of his depth with Regis Prograrius, who pretty much had things all his way for the majority of this fight. Tyrone McKenzie seemed to have come alive in the last 1 or 2 rounds before the fight was stopped, though opening up just resulted in Regis Prograrius being able to land more punches on this guy. As I stated earlier, Regis is levels above a Tyrone McKenzie. God bless him.
Tyrone McKenzie was out of his depth.
Former champion Regis Prograrius, who with this fight and this victory seems to have positioned himself to fight for the WBC title, the green belt, once that belt becomes vacant as soon as Josh Taylor moves up in weight and relinquishes all of those alphabet titles.
You know that 2 or 3 days ago, Probellum signed Jack Catterall.
You heard that right. Jack Catterall, who many people feel unofficially beat Josh Taylor. Jack Catterall, who many people feel should be this division's undisputed champion. He very recently inked a pact with the people over there at Probellum, and what that essentially means is that Probellum has at least 2 prize stallions in that 140-pound show. Now, I don't know if they're going to opt to match Jack Catterall against Regis Prograrius, an in-house fight that would have some appeal.
They've got 2 ways they can play it.
They've got 2 ways they can play it. They can opt to match those 2 boys against each other sooner rather than later because they are both Probellum fighters. Thus, a fight between them would be an in-house fight for Probellum. They can do it that way, or they can maneuver them individually, position both fighters to challenge for separate alphabet titles in the hopes that they can do a unification match later on down the line. If Regis is in line for the green belt, for the WBC title, maybe you have Jack go after, I don't know, the WBA or the IBF.
Maybe you do it that way.
Prograrius versus Catterall really is one of the better fights the 140-pound division has to offer. The 140-pound division that is set to have the reset button hit very soon, once Josh Taylor moves up in weight and vacates all of those alphabet titles. The landscape is set to change very soon.
This weekend's fight was a keep busy fight for Prograis.
Regis Prograis, who for the last 2 or 3 years has only boxed once a year. You heard that right. He only boxed once in 2020, only once last year in 2021, and this year, this was his first fight of 2022. There's still time to get that guy back out there, maybe in the summer or fall months.
I think he's top 5 in the division, but he needs to be busier.
And yesterday's fight was a little more than just a keep busy fight that didn't leave much to the imagination. I hope to see Regis in action sometime again this year, hopefully against someone as skilled as a Jack Catterall, someone more capable, someone more interesting than a Tyrone McKenzie, who we all knew was on borrowed time. We then come to the main event of that same card, the IBF flyweight title fight between the reigning champion Sonny Edwards and Mr.
What's that guy's name? Waseem?
Wasabi, a pressure fighter. It's very crude, very rough around the edges. He had the right base style for the job, though he's levels below Sonny Edwards. Pressure fighters oftentimes can be a pure boxer's kryptonite because they crowd them. They don't give them the room or the real estate, the time to box.
Yeah, when they're on the level.
Wasabi was several levels below Sonny Edwards. I want to say that if you view Sonny Edwards as perhaps an A-level pure boxer or a B-level pure boxer, I'd say that Waseem is 1 or 2 levels below Sonny. That would make Waseem, a C-level pressure guy, maybe a D-level. He's very crude, very rough around the edges. Not much thought.
Didn't offer much in terms of a game plan.
He was trying to lead with his head, bury it in Sonny Edwards' chest to work mid-range to inside within close quarters. The calling card of most any pressure fighter that is a pressure fighter. Sonny Edwards had the feet.
Movement and the counters to, for the most part, box effectively from the outside.
Straight shots, counter shots, very fleet of foot.
Everything you come to expect from a pure boxer.
Everything you've come to expect from Sonny Edwards in a fight that really wasn't hard to score in spite of it being rough in spots.
And those 2-point deductions Waseem got didn't help his situation.
So I will say, as the fight progressed, Sonny Edwards spent a little bit more time on the ropes than I would have liked. There was some question as to whether or not Sonny Edwards was staying on those ropes because he wanted to be there and he wanted to do some work, mid-range to inside, or if he was being put there by the constant pressure.
Was Sonny laying on the ropes as much as he did as a result of the pace of the fight?
Because you really don't get there by yourself. In any event, it wasn't a hard fight to score. You saw the much cleaner, clearer work from Sonny Edwards, who landed several straight shots and counter shots that Waseem seemed to have taken well. That's a byproduct of a fighter that's fighting on the fly, a boxer who's boxing on the move, like Sonny Edwards. There's not as much on the shots and the counter shots if the guy's on the balls of his feet, sticking and moving as opposed to sitting on his punches.
Waseem got hit a lot, but he took the punches well.
That is often the case with pure boxers who fight on the fly, and with that, Sonny Edwards retains the IBF flyweight title.
Attention now turns to Julio Cesar Martinez.
Julio Cesar Martinez, who Eddie Hearn hopes to match against Sonny Edwards in the very near future. Story is, promoter Eddie Hearn is planning to pursue a flyweight unification clash between world champions Julio Cesar Martinez and Sonny Edwards. Before that scenario can be explored, both boxers have to win their upcoming defenses. Edwards was back in action yesterday. He made a voluntary defense of his IBF title against Muhammad Waseem, and Martinez is slated to face a mandatory challenger in McWilliams Arroyo, which is being targeted to land on May 7th as part of the supporting undercard to Canelo Alvarez versus Dimitri Bivol. Martinez initially fought Arroyo in November of 2021, with the encounter ending in a 3-round no contest due to a clash of heads. Earlier this month, Martinez tasted defeat when he moved up to super flyweight and was dominated over 12 rounds by 4th division champion Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. One of the conditions of taking that fight with Gonzalez was he had to fight his mandatory against Arroyo because of the technical draw. But we're going to do that real quick. It might be on the Canelo card. Martinez will be back out in May, and then we'll do the Edwards fight in the summer, Hearn said to IFL TV. Martinez has to unify, otherwise it becomes boring. If Edwards is nice, we'll give him a fight.
Sonny Edwards has been very vocal that he wants that fight.
He considers himself the number one flyweight in the division, and such is expected of a young, unbeaten champion in his prime. I mean, what's he supposed to say? Sonny Edwards being with Pro Bellum and Julio Cesar Martinez being with Matchroom, I don't anticipate that there should be any promotional or platform issues that impede the fight because, Pro Bellum, they very recently inked a deal with Eurosport. Yesterday's card was shown here in America by way of Fubo Sports TV, but I don't see that as a situation that should hinder the potential unification match between them. So long as both parties are willing, they should be able to get it over the line. The only disagreements that could impede the unification match are monetary agreements, i.e. money.
Money issues. What's it going to take to get Sonny in the ring with Julio?
Pro Bellum is a fledgling promotional outfit, you understand. They're the new kids on the block, and they are amassing a rather respectable stable of fighters. Bektamir Jalalov, Sonny Edwards, Estelle Mosley, several others, many others, Regis Prograrius and Jack Catterall among them. But Edwards versus Martinez really would be a bigger fight if Matchroom is promoting it.
Because more people are familiar with Matchroom in the United Kingdom and the United States.
DAZN as a platform, well, I think that more people are familiar with DAZN as a platform as opposed to Fubo Sports TV that showed yesterday's card here in America and Eurosport 5, or whatever channel it is over there in the United Kingdom. I just happen to think Edwards versus Martinez is a bigger fight, has the potential to be the biggest fight that it can be if it's Matchroom that's promoting it.
Martinez has got to get past Arroyo first.
We'll see if he does, and then we'll see what happens. We then come to the Golden Boy Promotions prelim card that featured Ramla Ali against seasoned veteran journeywoman Machine Gun Shelly Barnett. 2 highlight reel knockdowns that led to Ramla Ali's first recorded professional career knockout. That's right, she took out Shelly Barnett and looked the part doing it.
Advancing to a professional record of 5 wins, no losses, no draws with 1 knockout.
Shelly Barnett is the kind of fighter you expect a young unbeaten up-and-comer like Ramla Ali to take on so early in their career.
You expect Ramla to beat her.
So it's how Ramla beat her that you have to look at. It's not the knockout so much as what led to the knockout. The variety of punches, body shots, uppercuts,
Ramla looked very formidable mid-range to inside, imposing her will.
During the broadcast, it was stated that Ramla Ali has enlisted the aid of veteran trainer Manny Robles and has since relocated to the United States, based out of the West Coast. And she did this in order to get out of her comfort zone, and I think it's working. I think this move is keeping her on her toes. A similar move to what we've seen from George Kambosos, who in recent years, he wasn't fighting.
He ain't been fighting out of his native Australia. He's been fighting abroad.
As a result of that, he had gained valuable experience that prepared him for the biggest stage he's ever fought on against Teofimo Lopez. I view this as a similar situation to that, to where Ramla could have got a UK-based trainer and trained out of the United Kingdom, but she chose to train in the United States.
She is effectively transitioning from an amateur point-based style to a more pro style.
More geared towards photo-finish punches and inflicting damage. That's what I think we're seeing, and that's why I think yesterday she racked up her first career knockout. That transition is a necessary transition for any fighter that comes from a respectable amateur background. They've got to transition from that amateur point-based style to a more pro style.
Ramla's developing nicely.
Is en route to become one of the more dangerous super bantamweights in today's super bantamweight division, with very generous physical dimensions for a 122-pound fighter, standing in at approximately 5'7". Those kinds of physical dimensions, she could be very formidable at super bantamweight and featherweight, 126 pounds. We then come to the main event of that same card, Battle of the Southpaws, the then unbeaten Blair Cobbs and Alexis Rocha, a fight that was bumped up to the main event of this card as a result of Virgil Ortiz pulling out ill with rhabdomyolysis.
Never thought much of Blair Cobbs.
He's got a lot of personality outside of the ring, but personality outside of the ring is no substitute for fundamentals and ability inside of the ring. And in this fight with Alexis Rocha, he was effectively exposed. I want to say that perhaps Blair the Flair Cobbs has given off the appearance of
a more capable fighter than he actually is.
Physical attributes like athleticism and power can oftentimes cover up certain sins, certain mistakes that a fighter is making. And with Blair the Flair Cobbs being a southpaw,
oftentimes coming up against orthodox fighters.
In this fight with Alexis Rocha, he didn't have that advantage. I picked Alexis Rocha to win this fight, though I didn't think it would be as one-sided as it turned out to be. Blair Cobbs couldn't get out of the way of Alexis's left hand, his straight left hand, his backhand.
His power hands.
So Alexis Rocha in this fight that only lasted about 9 rounds landed several power shots with that
left hand.
Blair Cobbs seemed to have been a sucker for it, couldn't get out of the way of it. Perhaps that's because he's not accustomed to encountering a capable southpaw.
Wasn't keeping that right hand high.
To protect that side of his face from that looping left hand that Alexis Rocha landed many, many times.
I told you, I was never big on Blair the Flair Cobbs.
And I've said as much on more than one occasion. I said as much ahead of this fight, that he doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that could go all the way.
Something missing.
The appearance that he gives off to me looked a lot like movement for the sake of movement. Some pop, some power at a certain level, though not the elite level, since Blair Cobbs has never fought any elite level guys. I didn't forget that in 2019 he got sat on his back pocket by Cervantes.
Carlos Cervantes in the first round of their fight.
I didn't forget a bit of inside intel I came across that Dominican Republic's own Elvis Rodriguez some time ago brutally knocked out Blair Cobbs over there at Wild Card on the West Coast. Brutally knocked that guy out, left him foaming at the mouth. Blair had to be transported by way of an ambulance. I didn't forget that bit of inside intel that was communicated to me. Essentially what I'm getting at is, I never thought much of Blair Cobbs.
Struck me as a guy who's relying on his physicality more than his technique.
He thinks he's got enough pep in his step to get out of the way of the shots. He thinks he's fast enough to fight with his hands down.
He's gonna keep thinking that until he runs into the wrong guy.
All that stuff. You can get away with all that stuff for a little while. You can get away with that stuff at a certain level, but when you step up in class, you're gonna bump into the right guy that knows how to exploit all of that stuff. The fact that Blair Cobbs doesn't...
He don't get his hands back fast enough to protect that side of his face.
His movements, they're not the least bit subtle. They're not the least bit defensible. These are broad strokes that are easy for a well-trained fighter to read, that at a certain level, he'll do all right, but when he steps up in class, he's gonna get exposed.
Neither Terrence Crawford or Errol Spence Jr. hesitated to rib this guy once the fight was over.
Errol Spence Jr. in particular wrestler who Blair Cobbs had some choice words over leading up to this Alexis Rocha fight.
Yeah, I can't say as I blame Spence. Blair called him a coward.
While I might have agreed with a lot of what Blair the Flair Cobbs had to say about Errol Spence Jr. in reference to the Terrence Crawford fight that has yet to materialize, while I might have agreed with that, I also don't expect Errol Spence Jr. to be happy about it.
Look, overall, it was a fun little fight.
But I figured Blair Cobbs was on borrowed time with Alexis Rocha, and it was only a matter of time before his sins caught up to him. Finally, we come to the main event of last night's top-ranked card that took place at the Hulu Theater over there in New York, Madison Square Garden. A lot of talented young guys on that card. Bruce Carrington, Shushu, Armani Almesteca,
Henry Lebron,
John Bowser, Xander Zayas. I was very much impressed with this young line of fighters Top Rank decorated the undercard with. But who I wasn't impressed with was the main event's fighter, the guy that all of this was geared towards,
That guy.
Edgar Berlanga.
very underwhelming.
Against the 37-year-old Canadian Steve Rolls, a guy who, a naturally smaller guy than Edgar Berlanga and Gennady Golovkin, managed to stop, but a guy that Edgar clearly struggled with. He struggled to find the power shots, struggled with his movements, keeping up with this guy and being able to land shots at the same time. I mean, Edgar looked just as limited in this fight as he did his previous fight against Coceres, which took place on the undercard of Wilder vs. Fury 3. It was identical. The only thing missing was the knockdown that Edgar suffered in the Coceres fight that he didn't suffer in this fight, though all the same, he looked a limited fighter.
They said they enlisted the aid of not only Kay Karoma, but Mickey
He
Bay.
didn't jump ship on Andre Rosier, but they instead decided to add to Edgar Berlanga's team, add to his corner, and it doesn't seem to have made much of a difference. What I saw in this fight that stood out the most is that Edgar wasn't employing the lead hand enough, the jab, the most important punch in boxing, the setup punch for most every other kind of punch. He wasn't jabbing enough, and it doesn't have to be a stiff jab that you step into.
Hey, you don't have to commit to the shot.
There are a lot of different ways you can employ that lead hand to set up that backhand and what follows. And that's what I saw Edgar wasn't doing in those moments where he's stalking Steve Rolls and he manages to get him to the ropes, but he can't seem to land a power shot.
You can paw with the lead hand.
Paw with it, not even shoot it, to get a sense of where the guy's going to be and where to throw the right hand. You can double up on the lead hand, double up on the jab,
Get Rolls focused on it.
so you don't see the backhand coming. You can gesture with the lead hand, gesture with it to get Rolls focusing on that hand as opposed to what other shots might follow. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to use that lead hand, and what I saw in this fight that made it so awkward and
Cringeworthy.
flat performance for Edgar is he wasn't employing his lead hand enough.
And just overall, he wasn't throwing enough.
Overall, he doesn't have the kind of speed and sharpness and snap in his punches to shoot a lead right hand, lead backhand, essentially a power shot. He doesn't have the kind of speed it takes to execute a move like that.
So fat chance of landing one of those.
And he doesn't have the kind of work rate the ways he can overwhelm the other guy with volume, activity. You know, get the guy, pin him down, unload, and see if you can't get around his guard.
Some hooks that might sail behind the gloves.
Some uppercuts that might split the guard, some body shots that might get Steve to drop his hand so you can go back up top and land something hard up there once he starts protecting his midsection. There was a lot missing from this performance from Edgar Berlanga, and I reiterate, it was identical, almost identical, to the same limitations you saw in the Coceres fight.
Only throwing 1 or 2 shots at a time.
So obviously looking for one big shot to do the guy so you can go home early, and that's just not going to work at a certain level.
Given how Top Rank's been promoting this guy, they gotta be scratching their heads right now.
What the fuck are they going to do? What are they going to do with him? They can't match him baby soft forever.
This is a case of arrested development.
Because he's really not developing, he's not getting better, and he needs to.
That's why I, unlike some others, didn't make much of his big knockout streak.